Our good buddy Nick Haines, Kansas City PBS, is here on KCMO. His show, of course, that he does an excellent job moderating, is airing tonight at 7:30 and then again on Sunday morning. Nick Haines on KCMO. Nick, good morning. What a week in Kansas City, huh? The news never ends.
It sure never ends, and you never know what's going to happen next. And we have two states, of course, so if it's quiet in one state, we've got something interesting happening in the other. And, of course, on this Friday, we have everyone biting their nails over the Royals. That's not my big story, but clearly is energizing Kansas City this week.
You know, you're right. When it comes to the Royals and the Chiefs, it's just not Nick Haines' thing. He's too busy worrying about, some of those sports they follow on the other side of the pond, aren't you, Nick?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm following the latest cricket and rugby scores, which I know don't get even 5 seconds, even in 1 year on your program, Pete. But somebody has to represent these sports. What is also interesting, by the way, we're going to talk about a number of issues, what has sort of disappeared from the radar screen. From how many months did we talk about the sports stadiums and where they were going to move? And by and large, that has sort of slipped completely off the news radar screen.
It is so true. So when you look at the top stories of this week in Kansas City, Nick, what hits you?
I think it still remains this sort of underlying anxiety over crime on both sides of state line remains a very big topic of conversation. And yes, it is true that homicides are down in Kansas City quite substantially this year, but non-fatal shootings, break-ins, burglaries, auto thefts are just being nonstop. And what I was very interested in was a great story from KCTV5, and we had Angie Racono from their investigation unit on the program this week with you, about 20 recommendations that are now coming forward from the city manager's office to try and fix the police department, improve the crime issue. And it just seemed like the panic button has now finally been hit. It's everything from keeping the lights on the top of vehicles, patrol vehicles all day long, changing the vehicles so that you see the word police and the KCPT logo in much larger decals. It is partnering with the Jackson County Sheriff's Office over staffing, no longer buddying up in police cars, that officers would be, in a riding solo in patrol cars. It just seems they're throwing everything at the wall right now because nothing, for all of the talk about money into prevention and so on, nothing seems to be quite working.
Yeah, it does not seem to be working. Like you mentioned, too, some of the more high-profile cases, like Sean Brady, the bar owner at Brady and Fox, who walked outside in broad daylight, saw his car was getting burglarized, tried to interfere, and he ends up losing his life. Now, Nick, I think there's this element, though, where people say, well, this is only getting attention now because it's happening in wealthier parts of Kansas City. Nick, I don't think that's true. I think that certainly this show and your show as well has spent a lot of time the last 4 years on this crime issue. I just think that people who don't follow the news cycle as much in this town are finally paying attention.
That is true. I do know that businesses on Prospect and on Troost say, we've been broken into 20, 30 times. We didn't get this same type of attention. I think the difference now, though, Pete, is that the kinds of people who are now in the face of the mayor and the city council are not your usual suspects. If you remember last week, we had Matt Chateau, vice president at the Chateau Milk Company, and certainly when they're doing all the red milk, for the Chiefs and all of the feel-good measures that they do, and they're the Betty Ray ice cream place, they have a break-in, and he then writes this open letter basically to Kansas City saying, Mayor Lucas, you need to show leadership over crime. That is very unusual, where you have such a grouping of people who are normally, this is Kansas City nice. We don't normally air our dirty laundry in that way. Things are done much more privately. And to go so actively and publicly condemning the mayor on this has put them on notice from a different group of people who have far more sway with the mayor's office and with the city council.
But what does it really mean when the mayor just got reelected by a very wide margin last year? There was no legitimate candidate. I mean, say what you want about Clay Chastain. I'll say it here. No legitimate candidate against Quentin Lucas, where he's like, hey, if you guys had a problem with this the last few years, well, there was no opposition to me in the mayor's race. So where have you been? At least that's part of what I would be saying.
Well, let's remember also that Frank White was handsomely reelected as the Jackson County executive. So was the Jackson County prosecutor. She got almost 60% of the vote, too. So they have not been held accountable at the ballot box. Who is going to the polls to do that? In this case, though, when you think about crime, a lot of these folks, including Matt Chateau, I'm not sure whether they are living in Kansas City, Missouri. Many of these business leaders may not be in Kansas City, Missouri. They're only now feeling the heat. They wouldn't have been necessarily voters at the ballot box.
Oh, that's a good point. All right, Nick, what else, when you look around town over the last week and, we're 40 days from the election, what else is standing out to you right now?
Well, okay, I'm pleased to say about the election because it is the first time I can remember that we're this close to an election, and I can't think of any race on either side of state line where I'm saying, this is a nail-biter. I have no sense whatsoever of the outcome of this race. That is very unusual. We usually have something that is so uncertain. We don't know what's happening. Other than the presidency, it seems that there is nothing that close that's happening. And that is remarkable. And when it comes to the presidential race, I also think it's interesting. Boy, we're like in a foreign land here, observing an election playing out somewhere else. We've had, other than J.D. Vance coming to town recently to do a private fundraiser where he wasn't meeting with the public, we've had no major players come here whatsoever to either Kansas or Missouri. And would it have been, asking a little much to even to have a spouse of one of these candidates, even J.D. Vance's wife or something like that, or Jill Biden, not even any of these major, cabinet members. We've had nothing here whatsoever. We are insignificant, and I think we're really feeling that.
That's interesting. Now, I will add to that and say, you're right. There's not one race that I look at locally and say, wow, that's really compelling. And I like to say the local politics, as do you, matter. But at the same time, I'm spending a lot more time on the presidential race because that's the one right now that's 50-50 that everybody's talking about. I can't force one of these local races to be interesting because right now there's not one that is super compelling. Now, you say there at the end it's hurting us. Why do you think it's hurting us? Just from a perception perspective or for some other reason?
Oh, I just think that we're not just getting any attention.
Yeah.
It has, there is a help that takes place because anytime you bring in a candidate and you are in a competitive mode, that means somehow there will be policy changes that take place, whether it be if it was electric vehicles or anything like that your own local plants would benefit and so on. There is nothing that is going to be focused on in this area whatsoever. So again, we other than on the sports front and Taylor Swift, that I think is our only claim to fame at this point.
Well, you know what, though? All things considered, that's not a bad place to be. Taylor Swift,
No.
Travis Kelce, and the back-to-back Super Bowl champs. I know you're not a football guy, Nick. I know you're more into the cricket and the rugby, but that's not a bad place to be when it comes to being the center of the pop culture universe.
That is true. I'm thinking of another story, by the way, which I think is what you called a talker in the business, and that is the $40 event parking downtown and in the River Market in the Crossroads, already taking some workers who are in those businesses by surprise that they're finding out at parking meters, instead of trying to find loose change of 25 cents for every 15 minutes, 2 hours for $1. Now it's costing $40 because they've enacted new event parking spaces at those parking meters. The challenge is that you don't even know when they will actually be using that event parking time. For instance, do you know there's actually a concert going on at T-Mobile Center? You're just trying to get your job downtown or in the River Market, and they're being hit by these fees. And it's an interesting time when we talk about inflation. Going from a couple of dimes in a parking meter to $40, that's inflation on steroids, Pete.
You're right about that, and they've got to get that figured out. You cannot be charging, waiters and waitresses $40 to park at their job while, you're trying to hose the guy or gal going down the T-Mobile for a concert. You're right. Yeah. They got to figure that out.
And when you think about when the last election for the downtown ballpark, the anxiety, I talk about anxiety over crime, we also have this huge anxiety over parking in this community. And that's not going to be, that'll have a chilling effect on people's willingness to go to do certain things downtown if you feel you're going to be hit with a massive $40 fee because you're at a parking meter.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Nick, you're the man as always. Looking forward to the show tonight at 7:30, Sunday morning at 11 o'clock. Kansas City Week in Review on Kansas City PBS. And we got to talk to you next time about the prosecutor's race. You guys are doing in Jackson County. You guys have a debate for that next Friday, right? That'll air?
We are doing the candidates there and the Johnson County District Attorney candidate. So both sides of state line, justice is on the ballot.
That's right. That's a great tagline. Nick Haines, Kansas City PBS. Thank you, my friend. We'll be watching. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Pete.
There you go. Nick Haines on KCMO. 7:30 tonight. I'll be on there with him. It was myself, Angie Riccono, who is great from KCTV5, Eric Wesson from The Call. No, Next Page KC. He got rid of The Call, or he left The Call newspaper. Now he's with Next Page. And then Lisa Rodriguez with KCUR. As always, I got to be the voice of reason. That's how it goes, right?